Welcome to our next installment at Home with Holland Home webinar. We are going to be talking dementia and a unique approach to dementia. So we're really excited for this presentation and listening to a couple colleagues and experts in this field. I'm Michael Sliba-Loafman, Director of Sales here for Holland Home, and happy to be joining you with this next webinar. I'm joined by the sales team, Victoria Carson, Selena Meister, and Patty Alexander at Bretton Woods, Cindy Price, and Amy Thayer at Raybrook. And again, we're just really happy to have you here. We'll be doing a presentation here, and I'll introduce our great panelists here in just a second. If you have questions, there'll be a question and answer portion at the end. If you could type your questions into the Q&A box, not the chat, but the Q&A box, that is the best way for us to kind of manage those requests. And then we'll try to do our best to answer those there at the end of the presentation. But I'm joined today by two colleagues and two really smart ladies in this area of dementia, and I'm just thrilled that they're able to work with us today on this topic of a unique approach to dementia care. I would say on your left is Lois Thomas. Lois, you want to raise your hand just so I have, so in case, yeah, there you are. She is been at Holland Home almost 4 years, memory care coordinator, and we're delighted she's with us. And then next to her is Lynn Bolt. Lynn is a 21-year employee of Holland Home. She has been most recently in training and education, teaching caregivers, and she went from teaching caregivers to being a caregiver and helping her father, who has dementia, and her father recently moved into Holland Home. So we'll talk a little bit about that and the care. So we're going to go ahead and get started. I've started the recording, which I almost have forgotten before, so I'm very thrilled that I remembered that. And so we'll kind of jump into this. We hear a lot of times about dementia. We hear that word, we hear memory loss, we hear Alzheimer's. Can you talk a little bit, Lois and Lynn, tell us what dementia is? Is it only memory? We hear all these terms, and what does it all mean?
Sure. Before I get into that, I'd like to greet everybody that is here and thank you for having us come, and so we can spend some time together exploring this journey that we call dementia. And having said the word dementia, we would like to just define that word and put that out there for you. Dementia is a term that really describes a wide range of symptoms. It's associated with, those symptoms are associated with damage to the brain, as well as change in your brain function. Now, the brain functions, of course, in the areas of memory, but memory doesn't necessarily equal dementia. There's so much more to what dementia is than just a loss of memory. It also involves mental functions such as language and communication, your ability to focus on a given thing, also to make sound judgments. And it also affects the senses that we live with on a day-to-day basis. Oftentimes people hear these two words in a sentence, dementia and Alzheimer's. Dementia does not equal Alzheimer's, and Alzheimer's really doesn't equal dementia. How we like to teach that is if we made an umbrella and this umbrella said dementia in it. So here's your umbrella. Underneath this umbrella, you have all these terms like Alzheimer's. Maybe you've heard of Lewy body or vascular type dementias. Those are different types of dementias that are underneath this umbrella. To date, there's onwards up to about 120 different types of dementia. And I'm going to have Lois talk a little bit at this point.
Yeah, so in some of those dementias that can be affiliated with particular types of comorbidities, like Parkinson's has its own specific type. that doesn't necessarily mean, of course, that every person with Parkinson's is going to get dementia, but if they do happen to have Parkinson's and they do happen to have dementia, oftentimes it is a Parkinson related type dementia. So there are some affiliated brain ailments as well as neurological conditions and even certain head traumas. So.
And what age are you typically seeing dementia typically appear?
Well, typically we say around the age of 65 and up, but there is such a thing as an early onset dementia, and so it can start in folks at the age of 40. And the real interesting thing is that dementia often can start even 20 years before symptoms ever show up, which can be alarming and quite frightening to folks. But the nice thing about that is those 20 years give us plenty of time to intervene, to do something about those symptoms. Unfortunately, we don't always know that we're in that 20-year phase. So.
Yeah. So, it feels like we hear a lot about dementia and Alzheimer's and memory loss. Like, it feels like it's becoming more and more pervasive. Is there data to support that, or is that anecdotal, or what are we seeing? What are the trend lines of memory loss or dementia?
Yeah, it's definitely not anecdotal. There are statistics to show that right now there's more than 6.5 million Americans living with dementia. About 4 million are women and about 2.5 are men. So it does affect women more frequently, but that statistic also coincides with the fact that statistically speaking, women still live longer than men do. So there's a correlation there. And as far as the trend goes, at this point in time, according to the Alzheimer's Association, they're expecting by the year 2050 for that 6.5 million numbers to exceed 12.7 million. So more than double in the next 30 years.
Wow. And that's interesting about the male-female. And you answer my question. I was going to think, well, why? But yeah, women living longer. So when we think about the pervasiveness of dementia, what are options that people can do for care? Because, not all dementia is created equal. I mean, not everyone has the same set of, challenges or severity of it. So what are options that are available for families?
Yeah, so the first option for families is kind of to seek out your own, what we call stakeholders, and that's your own support system. So, figuring out, the first thing to figure out is, what are the things that I know? What are the things that I need help with? And then determining who around you can provide some of that help. Is it, is it getting all of your doctors and specialists on board? Is it, are there neighbors that can come sit with you or sit with your loved one so you can go have some alone time? So figuring out what your own stakeholders are available, and then figuring out what the needs of your loved one is. Perhaps maybe you need a respite care. So maybe there's something, a specific situation, maybe an illness on top of what's going on with the brain changes that is making care a little bit more challenging now than usual. And so respite care might be a helpful thing for you to consider, in which case your loved one would go to a facility for a short period of time, get past that stage, and then when things have returned back to a baseline, they can come back home. There are assisted living options where maybe your loved one is doing pretty well, but maybe not so great at being home alone all day. And so we have assisted living options, with memory care options. There's at-home care. Maybe you need someone just to come in a couple of times a week. So, there's options for that too. And then if there's If we're to the point of severe physical debilitation, then perhaps we need to look at skilled nursing. So there's a multitude of different levels that we can address. We just kind of got to figure out, assess where everybody's at in the moment.
Yeah, yeah. That makes sense. Totally makes sense. So, so both of you have been here a while at Holland Home. How would you describe Holland Home's approach to dementia care?
I'm going to talk into that one a little bit because of the numbers that Lois was just sharing with you all. About 9 years ago, we saw that care was going to increase, and we just didn't want to care for the person living with dementia. We wanted to learn about taking care of that whole person. And so we looked into different avenues to try to do that. And one of the things that Holland Home offers now, not just to its caregivers, but to all employees of Holland Home, as well as we've had family and different organizations come in and do what we call a dementia journey, which is a training in empathy, that in order to work in Holland Home, they need to go through this dementia journey training in empathy, just to kind of gather what it looks like for a person who may be living with a diagnosis of dementia. And we also started researching a lady called Teepa Snow, who is a world-renowned expert in the area of not just understanding dementias, but understanding how to connect with people who are living with dementia. And so we have all been trained in different aspects of her methodology of care. And all of our caregivers of Holland Home, and as well as people who are in facility services, people who are in housekeeping, even our corporate group, they have gone through this training to help us understand better that we care for people living with dementia with what they still have left. We don't look at it as a whole bunch of losses, but we look at the person and what they have left and try to bring joy into that journey for them through a methodology of care that this Teepa Snow has brought to our organization.
Yeah. And when you talk about that, is that dementia journey, is that limited to just Holland Home employees, or who else will participate in that?
We have opened it up to families have come through the dementia journey. We've had organizations come through the dementia journey. Certainly Holland Home wants to open that up to families of loved ones that are maybe coming to Holland Home and wanting to learn a little bit more about what their loved one is experiencing. This is a good opportunity for them to contact our department and make ourselves available for that as well.
Yeah, and I will say, as someone that has gone through that exercise, it is very moving, and it's eye-opening. I don't think I'll ever look at people that are suffering from dementia the same way. It is, I would say, a sobering exercise, especially for some people that are very organized and very, type A, and when it is a frustration, and you can just feel the frustration that people with dementia are going through. So it was a pretty moving experience. So, so talking about the differences between how Holland Home approaches this and others, how would you say Holland Home differs in their approach to it? We've talked about our approach, but how does that differ from maybe other communities or other organizations?
Well, I think, Lynn's kind of described, where we've come from and kind of how we got there a little bit to our method of our approach. And for me, having, not been here as long as Lynn, the thing that sets Holland Home apart is we are very much concerned about, as she said, more of a holistic approach. So it's looking at their emotional well-being, their mental well-being, their physical well-being, and their spiritual well-being. And we look at our approach from all of those different perspectives. So we have something that we call a dementia coalition, which is a multidisciplinary meeting that occurs every 3 months to make sure that we're on track and meeting the needs throughout all of our different levels of care, assisted living, memory care, independent living. Try to focus on all of those areas and not just a memory care unit. We offer individual training. We are certified in TIPA Snow's positive approach to care. We offer PAC champion courses to our caregivers, so they're allowed to learn and practice their skills in a more of a controlled environment before they go onto the floors and use them with the residents. We do individual training up on the floors. Even our name tags are a green background with white writing, which statistics show are much easier for folks living with dementia to read, other than a simple little badge with our picture and our name that's this big. We go above and beyond to try to meet all of the needs of our residents because we care about who they are and who they've been prior to coming to us.
Yeah.
I would add to that is it's not just years ago we had this clinical model of just a clinical model for taking care of our elderly and our people living with dementia, that we really knew how to take care of them physiologically. We knew how to clean them and make beds and things like this, but we have taken it the step from caring for someone to caring about that person. That is so important.
And the approach is all about building that relationship. It's all about, hey, Lynn, it's
Hey.
Lois.
That's you.
Yeah, that's me.
you.
And
Yeah.
you are?
I'm Lynn.
You're Lynn.
Yeah. Those are nice glasses.
Thank you. I like your glasses too. I
Yeah.
love that green. Hey,
What?
want to go get some coffee?
I love coffee.
Yeah,
I love
love
coffee.
Yeah, let's go get some coffee.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Yeah, I all those things you did, like raising your hand to get her attention and all of those things that we kind of talk about in the dementia journey. And wow, Lynn, that was so powerful what you said, and Lois, you too, about not just caring for people, but caring about them. I think that what a unique approach. So this, and you've kind of touched on it with TIPA Snow and that positive approach to care. What has been some of the recognition Holland Home's gotten because of our approach and partnering with TIPA?
And so about 3 years ago now, TIPA started offering to organizations what she calls a PAC designation. And there's a long list of criteria of things that you need to be able to, objectives that you need to meet to be able to obtain these designations. And then her organization comes in and kind of evaluates, what your progress is in building and getting those objectives met. And so 3 years ago, our memory care unit, Cook, was the first one in Michigan to achieve the aware status, and we were 5th in the nation to achieve that. And to this day, we still remain the only one that's in Michigan that's achieved that. And then recently, our Breton Rehabilitation Living Center and our J. Mall Family Center both achieved the knowledgeable levels, so we're really excited about that. And again, we're the only one in Michigan to have achieved that, and so we're pretty excited about having that opportunity.
Yeah, and if you want to know or hear a little more from TIPA, I'm going to put a plug in for our This Day and Age podcast. There will be a podcast with TIPA that will come out next week on the 14th or 15th. And so if you're already subscribed to our podcast, This Day and Age, or you can go to the website, thisdayandage.org, and you can see her, or I should say, listen to her podcast next week, which I think you'll find very interesting. So
And for those of you who don't know, I'm going to interrupt you, Michael. For those of you who have heard of TIPA Snow, she's a world-renowned dementia educator and has created her own methodology. She's been an occupational therapist for over 40 years, and so she's been a phenomenal influence. And and the care that
Such
we
a help.
provide.
Yeah, wonderful. So we kind of alluded to this earlier. Lynn, you went from being training caregivers to being a caregiver for your dad. And so having a family member or loved one that has that lives with dementia, what prompted you to look at Holland Home for help?
Well, let me preface this first with Lois spoke to our coalition of folks from all of Holland Home that gather now on every 3 months. When we started that coalition all those years ago, I remember reading my Bible and coming across the verse in Leviticus in chapter 19 that God had mandated that when we were in the presence of somebody that was elderly, that is elderly, we need to rise and we need to show respect to the elderly. It's not just an idea, it's a mandate that comes from God. So I thought, how can I honor my own father as he's going through? For him, it was more a lot of short-term memory changes that were happening with him. And over the course of a 3-year period, my family cared for him through this. He lived independently, and for 2 years in a row, once per year, he presented to the emergency room with mental status changes. The first time he went in, there was a definite reason for that mental status change. I won't go into that because it's quite a long story. And so he was treated, he went through rehab, and he came home. And when he came home, I would say he was about at 85% of what he was before. So he still needed support. He needed rehab. I was over there probably 3 times a week at least doing chores, and my family as well. The next year, he also presented to the ER with mental status changes. However, there wasn't a cause to be found. He wasn't dehydrated. He hadn't hit his head. And at that point, as a daughter, I know a lot about dementia. And I know what I could say, okay, Dad, this is what we need to do. But at that point, I'm not the educator, I'm the daughter. So I asked the care manager who was taking that team of care people in the hospital if they would ask him a couple of questions for me, and I wouldn't ask them. So for people who are thinking about this or are having problems with their loved ones, get that other person involved that can be more objective. And at that point in the hospital, the objective came from a physician's assistant. And she asked my dad, stated his name and said, do you feel safe going back home? Because we were going to be discharged back to home. And this had been quite a long journey as it was. And he said to her, as he looked at me, he says, I don't feel safe. And so at that point, I asked, I could interject there with my dad and say, so you don't feel safe. And I don't feel safe knowing you feel that way. So knowing what I know about Holland Home, I knew about respite care. And Lois talked a little bit about respite care. And I had said, Dad, what do you think about just resting for a while and being cared for a couple of weeks? And we can talk about this as you go. And he was all for that. And so Holland Home got him a respite bed. And after 3 weeks, I used the same tact with the caregiver there. And I asked her to ask him the questions. I wanted to sit in the room and be the daughter. And my sister was with me as well. And the care manager just was delightful. And they had a really good relationship that had built over this 2-week period. And she stated my dad's name and said, I've been watching you. And my dad looked at her, and he's a little flirtatious. And he said, you have? He said, yeah. And he said, I like you around. How are you feeling about being here? And he said, well, the people are so kind. And he's also a World War II vet. So he said, I also get 3 hots and a cot. And the place is clean. And I think, she said, I would like you to live with us. And he looked at her and said, I do need aid. And at that time, my sister and I are holding hands. And he looks over at me, and I have a tear running down my face because it was so poignant. And he said, now, why are you crying? I said, I just think you're the greatest dad ever. And so that was the beginning of his journey, or sort of the end of our journey of, and you could hear it in my emotion. It was a lot of work. And just trying to respect him in such a way that he can make those decisions with prompts, with the right prompts, instead of saying, Dad, this is what you need. And don't you remember that? You did that yesterday. Don't you remember? I never used any of those terms with him. All my job the Lord has given me is to respect him and honor him, no matter where he is in his disease process. And right now he's rather flourishing. The other day he said to me, hey, I'm kind of, I forget the exact words, but I'm kind of set here. I'm kind of really used to this. So, and that's an applause for the care that he's giving and the people that love on him and that allowed him to share his life.
Yeah, and it's peace for you and your family, right?
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, we
tremendous.
can be his sons and daughters.
Right. Yeah. And I think it speaks a lot to Holland Home. We have a lot of employees that will eventually live with us at Holland Home, and or in your situations where you're an employee and you decide that this is where I want my parents to be, which I think is a huge vote of confidence, because employees, we kind of know what's going on behind the scenes, and kind of the real story of what life is like. And I think a lot of employees not only have chosen to live here, they've chosen to trust their family to Holland Home, which I think is a huge, and you're a great example of that. Anything else you want to tell us about your dad? How he's getting along and doing, and
He's 95 years old, and he was a mailman all his life. He has lots and lots of stories that he loves to tell and loves to share. He was very much an athlete. He played a lot of baseball. His brother was one step from the majors for the White Sox. And he has a picture of his grandpa down there. And every time he looks at it, he said, now that man is a powerful man. If he ever got a hold of you, I don't know what he'd do. So he has these wonderful stories. And what I love about the care that he's getting is they engage him in those stories. And stories for people living with dementia, especially if they have a really good long-term care base, it's just beautiful, because I can hear these stories and sometimes I want to go, okay, that's enough, but never in his presence, never in his presence. And I will close with this, with my dad. Because he was a provider, he had 5 children, he was a mailman, and my mother, for the most part, stayed home in those days. And so he provided well for us. And now that he's living in Holland Home, how do you help him to provide still, even though people are providing care for him? Well, my dad likes to steal apples a little bit. There's always apples in the dining room there, so he's always got 1 or 2 apples in his room. It's really rather cute. So when I go in there, when I go to leave, he said, would you like an apple? And I could say, nah, I got plenty of them at home, which I do. And I said, I would love an apple. Thanks a lot, Dad.
Let's him provide again.
well, you're not the only one getting choked up about that. I like that. Thank you. And thank you for being thank you for being vulnerable and sharing your story about your dad. And I'm glad we're taking good care of him here, and that we're not just caring for him, but we're caring about him. So I think that's really powerful. Lynn, do you or Lois, do you have anything else to add before I'm going to open it up for questions?
I think one of the other things that we could stress is, when we talked about knowing someone, who they were before they came to us, knowing, that Lynn's dad was a provider, and knowing that he's a mailman, and those things are ways that we engage with him. And we try to do that with our residents, having that knowledge of who they were before they came to us, what was important to them, what wasn't important to them, you know, what was their sleep schedule like what was their, you know, daily preferences, daily routines, all of that. So it's not just, you know, we say person-centered care, but it's more about honoring who they were so we can truly care about the whole person.
Right.
So
Yeah, not just a clinical approach to it.
Right.
So
Exactly.
yeah.
just
Well, thank you
relying on
both
care.
for sharing, you know, your expressions, both professional and personal experiences. So I'm just going to look to see if we have any questions from our participants. And let's see here. I see a question. Somebody raised their hand. I'm not seeing the question. Hang on a second. Bill, I think you raised your hand, but I'm not seeing the question. If anybody has a question, just type it into the Q&A box. If I don't see any questions yet, but if someone, you know, one of our viewers on the webinar would like to do the dementia journey, is that something that would be available to them to do?
Yes,
Yeah.
they can reach out to me. My number is 616-643-2622.
Okay, you want to repeat it?
616-643-2622.
Okay, great.
And I can help get them set up for that.
Wonderful. We do have a question here. What are the facilities like for each client? How do they live?
Well, I can talk to, most recently, Holland Home has remodeled, torn down, rebuilt, and we have areas where you have maybe 13 people living in more of a home setting. They certainly have their own room with a bathroom, but the halls are really short, and where those halls end is into a gathering place that has, you know, couches and engagements, things to do, and it's also attached to the dining room, so it feels more like home. And so when people are up, you think about wandering, which is fine. We want people to get up and walk around and wander, but also have limits to their safety. And that's how we sort of develop those homes for
Yeah.
them.
Mhm.
So there's more, you know, there's some of the larger units that have a little bit more of a like an independent or an individual apartment type feel, or a smaller like home setting.
Good.
Answer their question?
I don't see any other questions. So, of course, we have your number now. So we have questions, we can reach out, or you can always reach out to the team here. But I'll just again say our thanks to both of you for your time today. Thanks for all those that tuned in to this edition of At Home with Holland Home. And until next time, we wish you all peace and good health. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thank
for
you.
having us.